Welcome inside another edition of Mountaineer Report here on WV Sports Now. I am Mike Asti, and a lot to talk about as always. Football, basketball, a lot to discuss here. Even in the heartbeat of spring, maybe the crazy news will calm down, and maybe Wren Baker will have a year without a coaching search. It definitely looks that way right now, but I do not want to jinx anything for Wren, so knock on wood as the West Virginia football program wraps up their last week of spring ball and then heads into the spring showcase. The West Virginia basketball program will now officially introduce Ross Hodge as the 24th head coach in the history of the program. He is now done at North Texas with their loss in the NET semifinal game. And even we kind of, broke this news is the right term, but dug into this news and exposed this news. But it now looks like Mark Kellogg is also likely locked into at least another year with the West Virginia women's program. So, as always, I am with Cody Nespor here of WV Sports Now. And before we fully get into football and the Ross Hodge Express, which is a phrase that I've coined and I feel like I'm going to still go with as he now jumps aboard the men's basketball program. Cody, tip of the cap to you. As you dug in and found that Mark Kellogg not only had an extension that he signed a year ago after year one, which I don't know why it was announced. The program's all about announcing things. The whole athletic department is, but maybe they didn't want to do it after year one. But that kicked in a second one after this year because he ended up finishing within that top six, tied for fourth. And his buyout, from even what I'm hearing from people that heavily cover women's basketball in particular around the country, is probably now pricing him out of everybody. And that was right before I was hearing him in rumors for a program down in Texas, and no, not Texas A&M. So it's one that actually had a job open right now, as A&M does not. So tip of the cap to you, Cody. But it looks like right now, again, not to jinx it, anyone can pay any buyout. It's not a 0% chance, but it does look like Wren's not going to have a coaching search for a year. Everyone seems like they're going to coach this program through the year.
Yeah. It goes to figure when I break news, it's a year old, right?
that's funny. Yeah.
Doesn't that figure?
Yeah.
No, yeah. It was so funny. Because I know I told you, but just for the behind the scenes of it, I was just trying to do some due diligence on Kellogg's contract. Like my intention, everybody, was just I wanted to write a story about what incentives he had earned this year, right? Because he gets money for making the tournament, for reaching 25 wins, so on and so forth. And that's just what I wanted to do. And I did not have a copy of Kellogg's contract because the copy I had was saved on the work computer at my previous job, which I said it. So I requested a copy of his contract with the university, which, they have to supply those. And imagine my shock when I got it yesterday morning, and the first page is a contract extension that was signed last summer.
I was going to say, because the one that you had at your previous job, when would that have contract been dated? Would that have been the same one that we got sent yesterday, or would it have been a different one?
That would have been his initial, like right after he
right. So this would be a new one from that. So if you didn't request a new one, you say, for example, you sent yourself the contract when you left that job, and we just looked at that contract, we wouldn't have got the information without the new request.
Right. So it was, I don't want to say it's dumb luck, but it is like, because I was doing my due diligence, right? So it is like, when you do things the right way, you get rewarded. Which feels nice. Like I said, it certainly wasn't expecting to break any sort of news yesterday, let alone something that was from a year ago. But it's fun, Mike. It's always exciting to break news, to be the first on something. And like I said, of course, it figures when I do it, it's a year old.
Well, everyone had an opportunity for a whole year, and it didn't.
That's
happen.
True.
And it didn't even seem like they wanted it out there, but it's out there nonetheless. And it did also calm down some chatter, which is nice too, because even though it wasn't as likely, when his buyout was around $1 million or so, that was when I was starting to get some texts. Well, this school could pay it, even though it maybe not a better job. It would put him in Texas. That job's open. But when you get now up to the 1.35, it's not like schools couldn't afford it in general.
Yeah.
But the issue is this isn't football or men's basketball. That would be a very high investment in women's basketball. You'd almost
Yes.
need to be going to a Final Four within those first 2 years, guaranteeably. So
Yeah.
that is a
Yeah,
risky
and it's
proposition that likely takes them out of it and avoids us even having to cover the rumors. And I know for a fact there is somebody that was going to mention him as a candidate. Doesn't mean he was going to be going there, but as a candidate for a job that's open right now, and literally texted me after we published that and said, I don't even think I can actually put him up there as a candidate now because it almost would seem disingenuous. I do think this would price him out. It would be one of the highest buyouts, if not the highest buyout. I didn't fully look it up in women's history. And the other coaches that would obviously have the lineage to get crazy buyouts, like Gina Auriemma or Pat Summitt when she was coaching Tennessee, they're never going to go anywhere. So coaches with that high of a buyout usually are at their school forever. This would be a crazy buyout where a coach would be leaving after 2 years and getting poached.
Yeah, and it's interesting timing because people were worried about it. And this extension that nobody knew about, it increased his buy. The back of the napkin math on Kellogg's buyout was before we knew about this, it would have been like 750K. That's how to say that.
Right. Yeah, not 7.5. That would be, some people would think 7.5 million. Yeah.
750K. This buyout or this extension that again they didn't announce almost doubles it, which like you said, in terms of football or men's basketball, it doesn't seem like a lot, 1.35. But in terms of women's, it's a massive, it would be a massive financial investment. And the funny
you would be sending the message that you are serious about women's basketball above other things. And there are not that many programs that go that serious with a financial investment, right or wrong. In the women's game.
The funniest clause in Kellogg's contract is, so his buyout is 50%. Right. There is a clause in his buyout that if he goes to another Big 12 school, his buyout is 100%, which I you don't always see something like that, but that's just such a funny clause to me.
There's some safeguards in this contract that you almost wonder why we're not in DeVries's contract, why we're not in maybe some other coach's contract. Ren Baker has done a lot of extensions and buyouts over even the short time he's been in WVU's AD, and this Mark Kellogg buyout, he's putting his clamps in Mark Kellogg. Really more than anybody, and you could argue Mark Kellogg maybe was the least known before getting the job, so maybe he, I don't know, didn't want a guy to ascend and then bounce. And we, as we're speaking here, and we're still ahead of Ross Hodge's initial introductory press conference, we don't fully know his, so maybe he's trying to lock him up too, because you can make an argument, Cody, and we'll get into this later in the show, but Ross Hodge coming to WVU as a men's coach, resume-wise, is more similar to when Mark Kellogg came for the women's job. Stephen F. Austin, younger, not a long period of time. He did make a tournament, but didn't win. Not a long period of time of doing it at the major level. Whereas DeVries had several tournament appearances, had already a first four win. He was at Creighton. He was at Drake. He'd been at the level for a while. These coaches, like a Ross Hodge or Mark Kellogg, maybe part of a sales pitch for Ren Baker and wanting to avoid these searches is maybe I'll get them a year before they're really ready to pop. Maybe I'll get lucky and they do pop like Kellogg did in year one, and I'll put the clamps in and make these buyouts. I'd imagine the Ross Hodge buyout after the DeVries situation is going to be, I don't care if it's Kentucky. If you're leaving me after 1 year and we go to Final Four, we are getting loads of money coming in. So I would hope, and I would imagine, and I still, my opinion on the hire is still out there, but that would maybe appease it. And that maybe what he's done with Mark Kellogg would maybe spread some tea leaves on maybe what that Ross Hodge contract looks like. But yeah, and the school that I was, hearing was not a Big 12 school, but still that is also a very interesting thing. It almost seems like Mark Kellogg's agent. Maybe, there's some pieces here to be like, we need to finagle a little bit of this here. He has an attractive coach right now on the market, but we got that out there. It's on the site to get more details on it. And it does appear he's sticking around. It also doesn't appear there's any coaches who are in jeopardy. Who knows after a year and what happens, but it at least appears there's going to be a while before Ren Baker has to do another coaching search, which is a win for me. If nothing else here. Mountaineer Report, WV Sports Now. Find us on YouTube here. Click the subscribe button. Download every episode as well. Available where you get your podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, of course, etc., and find our full-on coverage of all of Mountaineer athletics, and hopefully, again, no coaching search for a while at WV Sports Now. And before we get back to Ross Hodge and basketball, because I feel like we're going to be talking more about him next week now that he fully gets into the transfer portal. He's been recruiting, by the way, even in North Texas, so alleviates maybe a little bit for you. You know, there has been recruiting. They're actually in top 5s, top 6s for some recruits that Power 4 programs want. And he, yes, was coaching North Texas, but there has still been recruiting. It's not like he didn't totally do it. But before we get back to him, Rich Rodriguez is wrapping up his final week in his return, year 1, back with the football program. They now go ahead to a spring showcase. And before we get there, because he's been very tight-lipped on what players are playing well, who's impressing, he's only let us see one day for 11 minutes. He's been very open that the reason why is you have a spring portal and he does not want anyone poached. He even said he's not going to let anyone, quote unquote, show out. And maybe some players that you want to see a lot are going to very minimally play in the showcase. It sucks for fans, but we do get it. And that's just kind of been the tone of these pressers. You ask him about an individual player or even the position, and he dances around it or even will flat out say, I'm not going to give you anything. And the assistant coaches are following that to a T. So, we'll give our thoughts on that here in a bit, but that's just the situation. So we have to kind of absorb comments about TikTok and, read into things. But one interesting comment that he made directly that was not even off a question that I definitely want to get your thoughts on, because we both covered the man, and it's his predecessor, Neal Brown. And out of nowhere, really, it was not like somebody said, hey, what are your thoughts on Neal Brown that you haven't spoke about yet since taking the job? But he worked it in to another question. I forget exactly what it was, but he worked it into his recent presser and literally said Neal Brown's a good coach. He thinks he's a good coach. He respects all his predecessors. He thinks he's followed a lot of great coaches, which allows him to have instant success. We're going towards the direction of, can you have instant success or will it be a long journey? And he talked about in the past, having instant success at certain schools is because of the coaches that were there before. And he said that would include Neal Brown, basically giving an opportunity that if he has a big year, to give a little 1% credit to Neal Brown. He has some existing players that he does like that were from Brown, giving him his credit for those players like a Rodney Gallagher. We have had an off season really where, of course, the fan base is very divided and there's a lot of polarizing reactions, a lot of hate still about the Neal Brown tenure, and everything either Rod said or a player would say, or Rodney Gallagher in particular, because they were very close, people would pick it apart, twist it, and try to make it a shot at Neal Brown. So I'm going to ask you, why do you think Rich Rod took it upon himself out of really nowhere to shower Neal Brown with praise? And what do you make of Rich Rod saying this? Because there have been even rumblings on social media and even some national media kind of dropping hints that some of Neal Brown's assistants and Rich Rod didn't get along. Matt Moore throughout the whole hashtag hard edge comment. It felt like it wasn't warm and fuzzy. I even actually heard some things from a former colleague of yours about a discrepancy on, somebody trying to buy somebody's house and making that difficult. And it just has not felt like it's warm and fuzzy of a transition, but it also feels like maybe Rich Rod's trying to calm down that noise. Maybe he's not aware of it, but he did talk directly, mentioning him by name multiple times, saying Neal Brown's a good coach.
Yeah. I think that was very, very big of Rich Rod. Right. Cause it's Neal would be a very popular punching bag. And we've seen it this spring. Like every comment Rich Rod makes, people want to ascribe it as a shot at Neal. And so I think it, I don't know if Rich Rod knows that, like that's how his comments are being construed, or I have no idea if he's aware of that or if somebody tells him or anything.
Yeah.
But obviously he was very deliberate in saying that about Neal, and I think that's very, very big of him, and I commend him a lot for that. Because like I said, it would be very easy to just pile on and say disparaging things, and the fan base by and large would probably support that. I think it's like I said, I think it's very commendable for him to go out of his way to do that for Neal, a guy that I don't know if he's ever met. Right. I'm not right. I'm not.
There's no coaching tree connection. Brown was out of there
Yeah.
before he came aboard. Yeah, I don't think they have met, honestly. Yeah.
And I just, I have a lot of respect for Rich Rod for doing that, and it's a little comment. It's not earth shattering. It's nothing like that. But to do it at all, I think it's very, very big of him. And I think even if, there's a portion of the fan base that won't like it and that won't like anything positive ever said about Neal. And so I think for him to do that, I think it shows Rich Rod's character in a way that we don't always see, in a way that even I am guilty of, that I think people don't kind of ascribe to him, right? Because he has
no.
And he's always
people thought
persona.
that Ren Baker saying he wanted a high character guy was eliminating Rich Rod, because he does have character issues. Not even just the WVU exit, but other things at Arizona and other schools. There have been character concerns. I'm sure he's a different person now, but yeah, that's a high character thing for somebody who has had character issues over the years. 100%.
And like I said, I'm guilty of that, of ascribing to him, character flaws that I don't know, right? I don't know the man,
right?
Personally,
at least. Yeah.
And that's good. Like I said, good for him. Good for him for doing that. I people know my personal feelings about Neal, right? Like I can't say a bad word about Neal Brown, the man. And to hear that from the new leader of the program, I think it's good, right? Because I don't think, as much as people might want to be petty or might want, there's some people that say, "Oh, I want an asshole as a football coach," or something like that.
Right. Or yeah, no.
100%. As much
You'd rather
as people,
win than have with an asshole than lose.
As much as people say that, I'm a big believer in like positive energy and karma, and I think stuff like that. And like, I don't want to make too much about what 2, 3, 4 sentences, but I think stuff like that is much better for a program in its reputation and the feeling around a program than being petty or being or having grievances or things like that. And like I said, so big ups to Rich Rod for that. It's again, I keep saying I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill, but certainly unexpected, and at least for me, very, very welcome to hear from him. It's just, I don't know, it's just good, right? I think just as when you reduce down titles and jobs and stuff, like, it's just people, man. And I don't think people need to be mean to each other all the time. And it's good to see that. In college football is not nice, right? Like, by and large,
no. I mean,
it's not, 100%. And so it's just I felt good reading that. I felt good, hearing him say that, because it is like, there is humanity in this job, and right, like, I'm making too much out of it. But it's easy to get jaded about college football and where it's at and the characters involved and stuff like that. I'm like, these are people, right, that do care and they're it's nice. It's just nice.
I think number one, it was a great gesture. I think number two, I actually think what we're learning about Rich Rod as a coach a little bit now, and again, I knew him when I was a student, certainly followed his career elsewhere, but now I'm covering him as a professional for the first time. I do think he's more in tune with what's being said by the media more than he maybe even wants the perception to be. I do feel that way, because in this exact same press conference, Cody, he literally on recording said, I respectfully ask you guys to stop asking comparative questions about other programs, other coaches. I think this actually is what segued into Neal Brown, because when we met up with Rodney Gallagher, we asked a lot about comparing Neal Brown to Rich Rod. And then that's also what I think set maybe this over the top, because as I'm sure you saw, Rodney Gallagher was that player that was the most tied. I'm not saying the best, but he was the most tied to Neal Brown of anybody. He was his top recruit. He's one of the top recruits in the history of the program. He publicly said that he would have not committed at all if Neal Brown was fired after 22. He came aboard. He always was loyal to Neal Brown publicly. Every time I talked to him, it was all, I'm coming for Neal Brown. And it was the program that his family even rooted for. They're not that far away. At Laurel Highlands, like, they're more WVU people than Pitt people, even though his sister did go to Pitt. But it was a lot for Neal Brown. Even talking to his family, Neal Brown sold them more than, say, Pat Narduzzi sold them. And they told me about, those meetings and how they went down. And they were coming for the man of Neal Brown, because that family cares about who you are as a man with their son more than anything. That is a very tight family. They go to all the road trips. I mean, it's wild. I was on a plane with them going down to UCF. So when Rodney Gallagher, and I don't think he did this intentionally at all, but when he started talking about this is the toughest spring, hard edge was kind of, and this is paraphrasing, kind of eye-opening to me. And this and that about, I think we're going to win right away because of our mental toughness and how tough this camp is, and Rich Rod. And then people started writing, oh, well, you're saying Neal Brown didn't have the ability for you to win right away because he's not tough enough. His camps are easy. Rich Rod has the hard edge. Neal Brown's not hard edge. People were writing that he was taking a shot, and it was more than even one person writing that. And I honestly believe, and we don't know this for sure, but Rich Rod's daughter is obviously very in tune with social media.
Yeah.
He has another son that's young that's on the staff, certainly, and Rhett, who's the quarterback's coach, that's very in tune with social media. They're active on social. I don't think Rich Rod's on social media every 10 seconds, but I do believe that his family, his daughter in particular, probably does tell him, this is what you're saying. This is how it's being perceived. This is somebody that's going to ask this question. This is how I would do this. This is, what went viral when you talked about TikTok. This is how to save this. And she should be. She's part of the program. She works for the program. She's his daughter. She should be helping him in that regard. No slight to her. But I think I think he's aware. Somebody was in his ear. I think he's starting to get aware. And honestly, Cody, you know what it even connects back to for me? If you recall, at Rich Rod's introductory press conference, which was it was really the most positive day with the fan base in a while. I mean, Neal Brown, the era was over. Pat McAfee was back. Yeah, there was the fan that yelled out, but it was kind of a period of atonement. Rich Rod literally cried. It looked like it was a positive day. And there was a former player who I've talked to, who I like, who I know a little bit, not personally, but has been around the program, and it's great to have him around the program. I'm not going to even call out by name now to make it a thing. But there was a former player who literally threw a shot at Neal Brown unnecessarily, completely unnecessarily, on a positive half hour at the end with the question of, how big is the backyard brawl to you? 100%. And the fans might even get this, but I immediately knew he was insinuating off of Brown's comment to Narduzzi, because that a lot of the alums did not like that. And once Brown said that, even with 2023, they were no longer sold because they're in the Big 12, but they want to keep the brawl thing going. And I do think, Cody, that Neal Brown was mischaracterized in that one comment, that is, he doesn't give a damn about the brawl. He lost 2 of them. He only won 1. He obviously knows it's a big deal. Okay. If I'm going to coach Auburn, I know the Alabama Iron Bowl is a big deal. Doesn't mean I got to know the lineage of it for 100 years. It's a big deal, whether you're from there or not. He was aware of the history of the rivalry. Neal Brown's a student of the game as well. But that comment hurt him with the alums. And then there was a shot given, and then Rich Rod, I don't think, was even aware of that. And he kind of indirectly was like, oh, it's the biggest. Any coach got to know that. And people took that as he was throwing a shot at Neal Brown. I don't think before coming to WVU, even at the intro presser, Cody, I don't think he was aware of the hatred at Neal Brown. I'm sure he knew about the billboards and watched McAfee, but I don't think he knew that question was an indirect shot. Once he gets to the media and he's been around and he hears from alums, he hears from the fans, and he reads and he sees who's legit and who's not, and he's getting from his daughter what's on social, I'm sure he's starting to say, to himself, this was just really a toxic environment. And I'm coming as the most controversial figure, arguably, in the history of the program, off a toxic environment with pressure to win right away. I can't fix what I did 17 years ago, but we got to have some repairing of this divide. And maybe I'm going to giving him more credit, and he's maybe, didn't think into it this much, but maybe he thought to himself, I'm going to throw Brown a little compliment here, and maybe we can calm down and have 24 hours without a calling on how I'm taking a shot at Brown. And I want all the fans to be supporting me if I win. That includes the Neal Brown supporters, the Neal Brown lovers. I don't want to have the polarizing divide that was around for 6 years. Neal Brown knows it wasn't good enough. Rich Rod knows. Neal Brown knows. He'll be the first to tell you that. And I think it was just good to have that because, Cody, I think the other thing is, Pat McAfee, to his credit as well, even when the billboards were up, he would go on his national show, which is watched more than anybody in the country, and say, take the billboards down. We need to move on as a program, but he's a good guy. The era's over, but we don't need to have billboards. He's going to be fired soon. Like, he knows it too. Take the billboards down. He tried to calm down that noise. None of that's going to work. I truly believe the only man that can maybe at some point allow Neal Brown to kind of be welcomed back as a Mountaineer, once a Mountaineer, always a Mountaineer, even if it wasn't a successful era, is Rich Rod, is the guy taking over. So I think Rich Rod maybe kind of realized that. And, Cody, we weren't going to try to make this a thing and follow up with this. Rich Rod knows better than anybody that there can be circumstances. And again, Neal Brown did not win enough. He deserved to be fired eventually. He knows it. But Rich Rod knows there can be circumstances, sometimes out of your control, that can lead you to not have success. Rich Rod went to Michigan after he left WVU, and he has went on shows for 2 decades saying that it was not his fault that he didn't win there, and then he was fired. He's been fired from major job and said it wasn't his fault. So he did the excuse thing that everyone hates that Neal Brown has done the last couple of years. He did it. So maybe he also looked into things around and been like, I saw what the NIL was last year, and I know what it is now. And if I had last year's money, that'd be harder than this year's money. I see the staff now and the money that's there for the staff now, and Zach Alley and what Larry Porter's getting paid. But I'm sure he's getting access to what him and the GM are looking at. Oh, here's the books from last year. Oh, Neal Brown had half the money for everything. That's harder. Like maybe Rich Rod's just getting his eyes open to some things and felt, I'm not going to make this a whole thing. But, he's not just trash. Like, he was a good coach. He's a good dude. It didn't work out. He knows it. And I also will say, I think Neal Brown even appreciates that as well.
And the point I was going to make, and you kind of made it for me, Mike, is like Rich Rod knows what it feels like to get fired, very publicly get fired. Real quick, while we're because I'm not going to get another chance to talk about this. The 1 second we talk about billboards, the billboard on the road by my house, somebody bought it to say "Welcome to Ross Hodge."
I saw it. I saw.
But it's funny. It says "Welcome to Morgantown" is huge on it, and then Ross Hodge is really tiny at the bottom. And I saw that this morning.
If it was a bigger name head coach, it would have been a bigger name, probably. Yeah.
But I was just like, we could get the guy's name on there a little bit. And then real quick, something in the chat. The spring showcase on Saturday is not being streamed, and it's not even on the radio. But to be fair,
not a game.
I don't know how much there would be to watch or hear about on the radio anyway. So
there's not going to be play-by-play. They're literally not playing a game. They're not going to break up in teams. It's not going to be Gold versus Blue. It's not going to be, and we are going to discuss this actually because I'm sure there are fans that are upset about this. It's not going to be the way it was treated forever. And Rich Rod's been honest too. He's doing it this way, and it will always be like this under Rich Rod. But it's not really his fault. And there's one way to fix it. And again, it's not on him. But I just think it was, again, I don't think we need to talk about it all season long. I honestly think it should stop being discussed. I think Rich Rod should be the final comment. He's a good coach. It didn't work out. He knows it didn't work out. Again, what Rich Rod said also is true. The man had, Rich Rod is coming to West Virginia after Group of 5 success.
Yeah.
Yes, he had power success. And yes, his resume is borderline Hall of Fame prior to that. But it had been a while. It's coming after Group of 5 success. Neal Brown has Group of 5 success. He has success on his resume. And yes, West Virginia did not work out, and that was his biggest job. But you don't get the West Virginia opportunity if you didn't at one point have success, which is why at that time in 2019, that was a universally praised hire. Everyone in the country thought that was a positive hire. It did not work out again. He knows that. But again, he's not the worst coach in the world. And I do think some of the hate went way too far. And again, not only does Rich Rod know what it's like to be fired, you can Google search and, watch him interviewed on CNN about this decades ago. He knows what it's like to have his family come to him and say, I can't go to the movie theater because I'm getting so much hate. That is what Neal Brown's kids felt. So I do think there is a chance here. There is a chance here that Rich Rod, as he is older, as he is more mature, and I do think maybe he's a different person than he would have been decades ago when maybe there were character concerns, that maybe he started to absorb what it's like there. He started to see the comments. He started to think, why am I still hearing about Neal Brown from alums? What's going on? When you walk in, why are you saying that guy sucked? Glad you're here. Just say glad you're here. Like, he's probably getting a little sick of it. And I know that he's still getting some because I even hear from some alums like, I'm glad that Rich Rod's back. This never would have happened under Neal Brown. we got to be done talking about Neal Brown. So we opened up this show talking about Neal Brown. I want to give Rich Rod the end on Neal Brown. His comments should live as the end on Neal Brown, and that should be it. And I don't think he's going to continuously bring up Neal Brown every single press conference. But to make this clear as we now move on, if you see people writing about Neal Brown in July or in November, or taking every comment from Rich Rod to say that he's throwing a shot at Neal Brown or hates Neal Brown, you are now seeing somebody live in front of you completely make something up, and you need to know that's the case, because Rich Rod's opinion on Neal Brown is now factually out there. And I also think kind of expose a little bit of people's thoughts on Neal Brown, not even just the fans, maybe a little in media. I think it needed covered, and I think it needed said, and I think it needed amplified, but I do not think it was covered and amplified enough. I even nationally, I think it was almost like, this is weird. This doesn't fit the narrative of the prior 3 weeks. So we're going to leave this go. And I think that sucks too. But I think it was good that Rich Rod said what he said. I do think it's an honest assessment. I saw somebody bring up, it was April Fool's joke from Rich Rod. I that's a coincidence. I think it was good that he said it. And again, it's very, very true. And I think it maybe at some point can allow, we got to move on from that era. We're in a new era now. The people that want Neal Brown fired, Neal Brown has been fired. It almost feels like there are some fans addicted to complaining about Neal Brown. You got what you wanted and you're still mad. Mm-hmm. Rich Rod's kind of trying to let you know, I'd like to move on. I'd like the Mountaineers to move on. You need to move on. So speaking of moving on, and it will be a weird segue, but off one of the questions here, and moving on into a new era of the spring game / spring showcase. And Cody, we talked about this on a past show, but now that it's here, I do kind of want to revisit. This is going to be an event of drills. He's not going to showcase anybody literally, despite calling it a showcase event. There will not be a game. This is not the first program to do this year, or even in general. There are other programs flirting with this as recent as a year ago. And Rich Rod's been honest that because there's a spring portal coming up, I'm not going to say that I have this diamond in the rough player, whether verbally or show them and then have somebody steal them away. Everybody knows Jaheim White's good, but if I feel like that Cam Vaughn, who's the only one that's kind of a little bit brought up by Ryan Garrett and some of the staff, if he looks to be better than what the perception is nationally, I'm not going to show you. I don't want him poached. You got a spring portal. I know you a little bit we're more disappointed that you're losing the spring game just for the history and for the fans. A lot of fans can only go to this.
Yeah.
Where are you now hearing more from Rich Rod where he's being very honest that, hey, this is the world I'm living in. This is college football. There shouldn't be all these portal windows. Maybe you should have one like the NFL. But if you're going to have one after spring, I'm not going to do a game. You're lucky I'm doing a showcase. I wouldn't be shocked if he shuts the whole thing down altogether. So this is just the reality of the situation.
Yeah. So I think and you're right, Mike. I am a big proponent of the spring game. I think it's a good thing for college football. I think it's a unique thing for college football. I do think it's now become untenable for college football in its current iteration. I do think there are two paths here for what programs can do now. In the first one, I'll talk about because it was in the news this week. Deion Sanders and the Syracuse coach whose name I'm blanking on now.
Fran Brown.
Yes. Yeah. They wanted to have like a joint spring game, and I don't know, actually play each other or do 7-on-7 or do drills but they wanted to do that, and the NCAA shut it down. And I think that's really bad by the NCAA, because here's two coaches innovating something that to drum up excitement, where spring games are not exciting anymore. People aren't excited about these things. And the NCAA shuts it down. I hope that, in this before next offseason, there can be some sort of legislation or decision made to allow teams that want to do this the opportunity to do this. Because I think that'd be really good, right? One weekend play whatever kind of game you want in Boulder. The next weekend play whatever kind of game you want in Syracuse. I don't
team's
see
not on your schedule in another conference.
Yeah.
Like they're not going to play during the year, right?
Yeah, I don't see how that's would be a bad thing. I think that would be very, very exciting for fans. I think that would be an awesome progression of spring games, right?
Like an exhibition
I
preseason.
yes,
Yeah.
and like suspend your disbelief for a second. Imagine a scenario where Marshall comes up to Milan Pushkar Stadium for some sort of spring event. That would be really, really, really
You
good
can,
for the city.
I think everybody would actually, as much as it's very polarizing, and I don't think Ren's going to let him do the home and home BS, but that I think is one compromise that I think WVU and Marshall and the state, I think, would get behind. It would not count.
Yes.
It would be a spring game. If they ever would play, I don't think you can do it with them. But if they're not going to play, I think that would be a way to appease. And I think the crowd for that would be through the roof because you would get two schools that almost never play that for the state. I think that would be a nice compromise as well. And I think that could make sense.
So I think this sort of spring exhibition thing, or whatever you want to call it, whatever it could morph into, I think that's one way that the spring games could evolve. The other one, which kind of goes in the opposite direction, is you go to something more professional. I'm thinking hockey and baseball, where you sort of have like a fan fest, where there's no expectation that there's going to be action. There, players aren't in pads; they're just in jerseys, and it's, you set some things up on the field, let fans come on, walk around, get autographs, all this sort of stuff. I remember it would have been the 2016 preseason. I went to the Pittsburgh Penguins one in their arena. My sister and I went. We had a blast. I had never been to something like that before.
Okay. Pirates do it every year, and that actually is what.
Pirates
and honestly, Nutting gets the hardest questions in that the whole year. Yes. That is the one event where they actually take real questions and try to answer. So maybe you could have like a fan, not us, fans asking Ren, did you hire your buddy or did you hire somebody who's going to be around a long time, or is this the best coach available? And Ren forced to answer, because that is what goes on at Pirates Fest. It gets that real. So I think fans would really like that if they got to be, okay, Mike and Cody, you don't want to ask this question, I'm going to ask it. Not that we wouldn't ask, but like they could be in that situation. Maybe even have a whole cry session about 17 years ago. That might be really unique to do it this year. That could be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, I think that's a good, I talked about this exhibition would be a good substitute for the action. I think this would be a good substitute for the fact that, like you said, Mike, if you can't afford to go to a game, the spring game was good to go to. I think something like this would be good to go to for those people. Like come and you actually get to meet the players and be on the field and be in the stadium. So that's in my mind, at least, and nobody cares what I think, but in my mind, that's like the branching path we could take right now for how to make spring games more relevant than this showcase, right? Because it feels like programs are trying to strike a balance between what spring games used to be, but without showing anything off, like Rich Rod says, without actually, showing players and
not showcasing anything. Yeah.
We've seen it at other schools. We saw Neal Brown do it a little bit, where the drills aren't exciting, as much as actually running plays.
Or you could scrap it all damn together. Matt Rule just like, F it, we're not doing it.
And the most exciting Neal Brown spring game was when Deuce McBride came down the track like a wrestler, right? And made the surprise and did some cool, but. I just don't.
Yeah, because even McAfee and Pat White, they weren't surprises, and there was not really a game anymore. I mean, a little bit of a game. But
that was exciting.
It was cool a little bit. Yeah,
it was neat. But like, spring games as they are right now aren't going to survive 2 more years. Really, like if nothing changes in 2 years, nobody's going to bother. I don't think.
No, and I do think out of the two plans that you brought up there, based on what the NCAA has clearly said by denying the Coach Prime Fran Brown plan, and obviously, Fran Brown joked that if it was 2 white coaches that came up with this, they would have done it. And then he also tried to backpedal and said, I'm not saying that before you totally find me. Because he's trying to build up a program that's, prior to last year was dealing with their own trek in the wilderness, and they got good last year too. So he's proof that it can happen quickly and gain some steam. But if they're not going to do that, based on what hearing from the NCAA and based on what they're saying, it almost feels like that the second example you gave of more of a fan fest would be that compromise the NCAA would probably let you do. And if you want to go out there and be honest and do a player meet and greet, AD coach players, it's probably up to the program to do that. And then maybe you go in knowing you're not going to get a game, but maybe fans, honestly, the way this fan base works, Cody, I could see somebody driving 3 hours to be able to talk to Ren Baker. So what we got Saturday is scrimmage and drills, but there's no chance of anyone talking to Wren unless you're in the press box. There, maybe not even then. I mean, we're going to get coaches after the game, but they're going to be talking about drills, and it's going to be the exact tone of the press conferences leading up to the spring game for what I will predict. There's nothing to, he's not going to tell you, oh, this player is great. Look at what you saw today, like you would have maybe got from him 2-3 years ago.
Yeah.
He's going to say, I didn't let you see anything, right? Because we got a portal coming up. I got to worry about the portal. Like, and then you're going to, it's almost like, the same song and dance, and I'm sure fans are starting to roll their eyes, but that's just the reality is, I could argue, Cody, if you look around even our network, but certainly around the country and people who cover other programs, you could argue that he is being a little tighter than his net. 11 minutes in a spring, and this is nothing that they, should be upset about me saying publicly because I've said it to them and other media have said it. That's a little tight. We've been told we're going to get more in the fall, which is closer to the season. This is what Rich Rod did years ago, by the way, and this is kind of what he does. He's very tight, even before this era of the portal, on what you're going to see. So we're getting less than, WVU media is getting less with this program than almost anybody in the country. And it's year one, and he has pressure, and I get it. But, you could give a couple more days. I mean, I'm saying, even if you want to have the O-lineman stand around and do it, be in a circle, you could at least, have some mirage a couple more days. But I totally understand what Rich Rod's saying, or even what Neal Brown said before, because Neal Brown actually kind of alluded to this, and he actually talked a little bit, to give him credit where it's due, actually, not to bring him up again, but he brought up, he didn't say Marshall in directly, but he said he'll be interested in playing scrimmages with schools that are not on their schedule. So maybe we eventually get there. Maybe we do eventually get there. And that, I think, would be cool if they're not on your schedule. I mean, of course, there's going to be a random year where you end up playing one in the playoff, and then fans are going to say, oh, man, you showed them something 4 months ago. There's no full-on fix, but, yeah.
Well, hey,
if you want
even then it's like, call up Robert Morris, have Robert Morris come down, right? Call up Fairmont State, right? Like,
Robert Morris is on the schedule this year.
Well,
don't call them. That's week one. But yeah. I mean, 100%. Call anybody. I mean, Pitt should be playing Duquesne, and West Virginia should be playing Marshall. And if nobody wants to get those together, then call RMU and be like, hey, Marshall. 100%. You should make a mockery of it. Call Marshall and say we'll do a scrimmage with you. It will not count if you happen to win a scrimmage. You shouldn't have a parade. It's going to be an exhibition game. And if Marshall comes back and says, we'll only do that if we can have the spring game at our stadium, every other year or some BS. You can hang up the phone and say, we got more seats. We're the bigger program. If you want to, if you're going to be that immature about it, then we're going to call Robert Morris. We'll call Duquesne. We played Duquesne last year. Now Duquesne's not on the schedule. We'll call Duquesne. F it. Like, whoever. And maybe you'd have a weird, cool thing, Cody. There's going to be a break in the brawl, 3-year break. Maybe then do you say, okay, we'll do a scrimmage with Pitt. We're not playing this year. They can't play us. They can't beat us. They're not on the schedule. So maybe we'll do a scrimmage. That maybe would be cool. James Franklin even brought this up about he was thinking about doing this with Temple. He said this publicly, and then that kind of got dashed. So it's funny. The NC had an opportunity where these coaches are like, we will put it together for you, and you can get credit. And they don't want to do it still. We're never going to get the spring game that existed before. It's just never going to happen. If that is the only time you can see the Mountaineers in person, that's unfortunate. I'm sorry for you. Rich Rod, I think, would rather win, and I think you would rather him try to win than to have a spring game and lose all his players. So even if he did a scrimmage, Cody, he probably would, still be scared to expose half the players and would have a scrimmage in which the team sucks because he's worrying about, the portal's there. And honestly, as much as there needs to be a similarity to the NFL, you need to be able to lock rosters at some point rather than just be moving out all the time. I don't know how you don't have a little bit of a spring portal, because if a player loses his starting job that he originally thought he was going to get, to force him to be stuck at a school sounds disingenuous when coaches are going all around the country every day and changing jobs. So if you're going to have one window, it almost feels like this window is more necessary than the one before the bowl season, which then screws your postseason. That one got to go. But you got to have one at least.
Yeah, I actually think just a spring portal would be the way to go. And it's
Right. You kill the spring game
I
still, but it would be fair.
yeah. But I don't want to punish players, but I do think it's fair to say, hey, if you decide at the end of your season you want to transfer, then you don't get to be in spring camp, right? Because the portal's not
or
open.
you can come to spring camp and then decide afterward. I mean,
Or
many
I
players
mean,
are saying they wanted to go to spring camp and give it a shot and then make
it's
the
either
decision.
it's either do the spring camp with the team you're at now,
Yeah.
or CJ Donaldson commit to Ohio State. You don't get to participate in spring camp. Maybe you're on the sidelines. Maybe you can attend, but you don't get to do it, right? Well, maybe not. I'm saying the portal's not going to open, so maybe he's maybe not that. But like,
if you already know in your
players,
mind you're done, kind of what you're saying. Like if you know in your mind after the season, I am leaving this program. I don't care who's the coach. Then you wait it out. You tell your school I don't want to do spring, and then you go in the spring portal. Or you want to do spring because why not? But there's no point of like C. Donaldson committing in January. What is that? What is he doing in January at Ohio State? Like it. Yeah. You could. I mean, you can't play in the playoff.
Yeah. So that's my thought on that. But like I don't I said I don't want to punish players because coaches do it all the time, and I don't want to limit players' freedoms. But it is crazy. Like I don't think anybody says that this isn't. Just terrible for the sport. I mean, the basketball one opening during the tournament. I'm sure most people have heard what Tom Izzo said about it. It's crazy to hear that level of coach basically say, "I'm not doing the portal for 3 weeks," because and so something has to change. I mean, it's the NCAA. Something always has to change.
Yeah.
But I don't. Like I said, I don't know how to do it. I don't know. And they
don't. No, I mean, and honestly, and Rich Rod's brought this up a little bit. I think here's the point. As much as I agree with you, the system was, there were players getting money behind the scenes. There's been movies about it. Some of the players that go on shows now, whether it be basketball or football, they go on great players podcasts, like players go on Carmelo Anthony and, what bag did you get? And they're like, oh, I didn't get anything. And Carmelo says, I didn't get it. It's hard. Yes. You and I are like rolling our eyes. Like it's hard to believe that, but separate from that, even if you believe they're all getting cash, all the best players for 50, 60 years, even if you believe that, if they wanted to transfer, there was no way around it. They were going to have to sit out. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the transfer portal has fared it up in terms of players versus coaches, because there were times that a player maybe would go to a coach. Maybe that coach offered him some money illegally or whatever, and he wanted to go to that coach for the system or whatever. And then the coach would turn around and leave, and the player's sitting there, maybe literally holding the bag and stuck and would have to sit out. And, that could certainly derail your career at that point. Now that's not the case. So it's fairing it up. As Jay Bilas says all the time, the coaching portal's open year round. So why are you mad about 2 windows for the player portal? So if coaches can change, I mean, look at this. Look at what's going on right now, Cody. You have Maryland has a coach screw them over in Darren DeVries fashion. So they then steal a coach from a power program. That power program then steals a coach from another power program. I mean, it's a musical chairs that we're going to get to a point where somebody's going to be day before the season being like, well, we're just promoting an assistant and we're taking an Eilert year and it's over. Someone's going to be left out like that. That is where you are. And that's the situation. So how can that be coaches and not players? Yeah.
That basically happened to Virginia this year, right?
Right.
Tony Bennett, very soon before the season was like, I'm going to retire.
Yeah, he screwed that team 100%. No, that does. Yeah, and you know what? When you brought up Izzo, Cody, I would watch for this. I would be concerned about recommitting there if I'm a recruit. I would not be shocked if he's retiring any moment. Any moment. I'm sick of the portal. I'm already a Hall of Famer. I got a ring. I've been in the Final Four a bunch of times. I certainly think he's not too long for this. So if you're committing to him now, how long are you going to be with him, and how long do you think he's going to be there? That should be in your brain already. So that is the situation you're living in. So it got to be fair to the players to allow them to do that. But here's the difference, Cody, if you want to compare college football to the NFL as well, and what Rich Rod's been talking about throughout all spring. There is not one player of any level in the NFL who has the ability to be a free agent every year unless you have a 1-year contract.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way. Does not. There is no, even if you are a disgruntled Hall of Famer, because we've seen this all the time, where you can kind of make it clear, I want to request a trade and you want to make some noise. Myles Garrett tried to do this and then ended up taking money and failed and didn't leave Cleveland. Like, the players can try to ruffle feathers and do that, but it's harder in the NFL than in the NBA. But even in the NBA, if a player ruffles feathers and says, I got to go, they got to work a trade. You get something back. There's a trade that's worked. Unless you're a free agent, then of course you can do it if you're on a one-year deal. And then when that deal's up, then of course in any pro sport, obviously you can go. In college football, in college sports, in college basketball, every player is a free agent every year.
Twice a year.
Twice a year, actually. Yeah, so it doesn't matter how much the player is tied to a coach. They are free twice a year, every year, of every level. That is the difference on how, yes, college football is becoming a pro NFL-like model, but not in that respect. And I totally get the counter argument, Cody, that even the richest school among us, if you had everyone have a contract and they were 40+ hour week employees, then based on how the government works, you start having people give people health care, and schools could not afford to do that. So I understand that argument. And if you don't have them work 40 hours, then a coach like Rich Rod's going to say we're not working enough. And maybe that'll hurt the product on the field. I get that too. I get those arguments. But no one is a free agent every year in any other sport unless you have a one-year contract outside of major college sports. And that is the problem. You got to have some way of locking them into something. Some even like a deal memo that locks something into something. I do think that even people who were the strictest against contracts before are starting to come around, because this is getting abused 100%. You have players who are committing to a school, like, honestly, this is funny even for the network, Cody. I sent you a Chris Henry Jr. He's now back locked in with Ohio State, and you were like, well, Mike, I'm looking up your coverage, your coverage that he already committed to. I was like, yeah, I know, it's a farce. He was committed there, but then he decided out of nowhere to say, oh, it's open again, and he went on a few visits, got some, jerseys and maybe some money, and now he's going, he's still back there. Like, those things happen all the damn time. Like, commitments mean nothing if you don't get signed, and then you still got portals. So, yeah, April Fools. I mean, to even have him available should have really been an April Fool's joke for a year. But yeah, so that is a situation. But you can't have this much activity all the damn time. They're making a mockery of this for sure. And I do think that's also going to officially kill the spring game. Mountaineer Report here, WV Sports Now is for our coverage. Find us everywhere you get your podcasts, and of course here in video form on YouTube and us on social media as well. I do want to close the show with, I guess, kind of the man of the week, who's now the newest Mountaineer, and that is Ross Hodge. We can make him the end of the show because we've already talked about his hire really ad nauseum, including our initial reaction, which admittedly I didn't like the hire. I still kind of need to be convinced, but he's coming aboard. I do feel like some of the chatter negativity has calmed down a little bit. More people are giving him a chance now. Maybe the benefit of him coaching North Texas through the NIT is that you didn't do a presser right away where you would probably get angrier fans, people not attending, maybe harder questions. This is kind of now a calming period where you're going to do it, and it's a week after the announcement. Has your opinion changed at all on Ross Hodge being hired? His resume is still not that vast at this level, but he's going to be the coach whether you like it or not, basically. So where are you now on Ross Hodge after a week of letting it simmer?
I'm probably in the same spot. Like, I didn't dislike it, even as much as you did. I
disliked it the most of anybody.
My main thing, and I won't rehash my whole thing, but my main thing was just that it felt a little early. And I think you're right. I literally, as we were doing the show, I just had one of my good friends text me and said, I think I'm excited for Ross Hodge now. And I'm like, I don't know what changed that other than time, right? I do think, the getting to watch the game last night, the North Texas UC Irvine in this NIT semifinal, I think that probably did a lot because, usually when you hire a coach, they're done, their season's done, so you don't get to see them in action unless you go back and seek out film. And I don't know how closely you watched it, Mike, but I was fairly impressed, right? Like the players played extremely hard.
Yeah.
The defense was pretty much as advertised. They had a big offensive slump, which West Virginia fans are familiar with.
That's what I'm
And
going
it
to
was
say.
a
Yeah,
good,
the defense
it was a
was West Virginia defense, but yeah,
yeah, and it was a good
offense
ending.
was
So
not.
that's I actually think that probably went a long way for a lot of people to see him in action with his team, and for them to play pretty well, even though they lost.
Yeah, I mean, the naysayers would say this, and maybe I'll just take that role because I was the hardest on the hire. I do think watching him maybe helped. I do think he does get a lot out of his team. He certainly to be able to win at that program. You can debate a WVU resources comparison to the top programs, but the resources he's going to have at West Virginia are going to be another world comparison to what he had to do at North Texas, and certainly at a junior college level. He has won everywhere he's been, which is even what Rich Rod said about him. So I do think it's too soon. I do think the value of the program should have got a better coach. I do think, Cody, when you look at what Iowa did, what Minnesota did, what Maryland did, and Maryland's a step above, but Iowa and Minnesota are not. Similar programs, whether it be geographically or historically, West Virginia being better than Iowa and Minnesota, they're hiring more proven coaches. So I think it's a big risk for you being Ren Baker to say your program has this kind of value. It's a top 20 to top 25 job in the country. You bring up the history and read the lineage all the time at every open presser. We're going to get it again for Ross Hodge. And then you turn around and say, I'm going to give all the tournament appearances and this resume to a guy who's never been in the tournament and is mostly junior college. That is a tough sell when a year earlier off drama, you brought in a much sexier coach, a much more attractive coach based on his career and somebody who fit the job a lot more. But again, you want to give him a chance and he's going to be the coach. So maybe time has calmed that down. Even as I'm saying all this, I'm not, yelling or ranting as much as I was a week ago. So I've calmed down as well. So I think there's a calming period in watching him. Certainly he does look like a good coach who gets most out of his players. The detractors and the naysayers from the game film will tell you he gave you maybe the reason why there's been a couple years in a row of this program who's normally in the tournament of not being in, even the end of Huggins, where your players play hard. Is West Virginia tough defense? He's going to fit into that regard. It's a blue-collar team, not enough offense. Got to have more offense to go far in March. And that is going to be the concern for fans that Javon Small was a Big 12 Player of the Year candidate for a while, led the league in offense, and Tucker DeVries was hurt. But Cody, they were 300 plus in total offense, and they almost made the tournament. If you make that 200 in offense, they probably win 25 games and are walking in the tournament, and you don't have a debate. So that I think is the problem. You can't. I mean, Huggins teams at the end were kind of they just weren't as great offensively as they used to be. You need more offensively, and even who he's recruiting, you're seeing a lot of 9 points a game on an average, 10 points a game on an average, 12 points a game on an average, a lot of rebounds over here, size over here. You're not seeing, 16 points a game on an average. It doesn't have to be in the Big 12, but in his conference. Like that was the sales pitch of even bringing Tucker with Darren DeVries last year. You have a leading scorer from a conference. It's not major, but it's something. That fans are not seeing that yet. So I think that is a fair concern. Forget resume and forget anything else that happened with DeVries and Wren. The concern just on the court is, will there be enough offense? Also, do they have too many guards? Because most of the recruiting that we're writing about is 90% guard play. The concern on DeVries was, why not more forwards? Why not more size? Why not recruit more rebounders instead of complaining about it all year? This looks like similar recruiting so far. Are you going to have the size? Can you rebound more? Can you have offense? If it's, the roster building looks similar to what DeVries had with a less experienced coach. We're very early in this. It does not mean this is the roster. They don't have a roster right now. But I think a week in, that's still a fair concern. Even I do think it's calmed down a little bit, but I think that's a concern. And I think we're in front as we're talking now, even to what his idea on freaking roster building is. So maybe he's going to say, I know that won't work. And, next week, get ready to write some forwards and bigger players. That could be the case. But portal's not open forever. He's now just starting the job. A lot of pressure on him. I think and I also do feel, just from quotes from a media colleague who did travel to go to get them, dap to you. And also just even hearing him in interviews from the broadcast and kind of following the NIT a little bit, even with Fran Fraschilla, obviously a WVU fan, on the broadcast as he's was a part of the commentary. The only thing I will maybe correct a little bit for my rant, I didn't think that Ross Hodge would be aware of the pressure to win right away and what the West Virginia fan will expect. It does sound like maybe he wasn't then, but it sounds like in this last week he is now getting aware that this is not going to be I lose for 2 years and then I'm still getting a statue in the future. I think he's starting to get aware. I got to pick it up. So because they kept saying on the Fran Fraschilla must have said 4 or 5 times, I think he's aware he has to win right away. So okay. So I want to hear it out of his mouth, but I think that's important too, that he's fully aware because, again, he's not experienced and his personality comes off a little more laid back than Darren DeVries, who yells all the time. So, but he's apparently aware. So it's interesting how that perception has changed a little bit. I think it's maybe a little blessing for Ren Baker, but and everyone can figure this out when you watch it live or it's out there. The tone of this presser is different. I mean, just lastly, any reading into that at all? Do you think there's any reason why we're getting the team room with media? I don't even know if there's going to be a donor there. Fans are not invited. There's no hoopla. McAfee has yet to even talk about it. I don't know if Country Road Trust is going to be there like they've been to all the other pressers. Every recent presser, including DeVries, at the Coliseum, Trust is there. McAfee's talking about it. He certainly was at Rich Rod's. Media there, more than just people who normally cover. You're getting extended media. Fans were there. I mean, Eilers wasn't like that, but that was an interim thing. This is a very toned down presser for a program that is very big in doing intros. You read anything into that, or am I reading too much into it?
My read would probably be the microphones in the Coliseum must still be bad, right?
Oh, they were. Maybe that's it.
No, I don't know. The 9 in the morning says more to me than the team room. I always laugh. 9 in the morning seems like prohibitively early for journalists, but like normal people. Normal people are at work already.
No, it's not so much. No, I want to make this clear. I'm up. No. I have a toddler. I am up. I'm only upset about the 9 a.m. because I want to take my toddler to daycare and then do it. This makes that almost impossible. Like, this is very, very early, but I am up. Lila's not letting me sleep till 9 in the morning, but even though she's a great sleeper. But yeah, it's just a weird. I mean, I don't know. Maybe because football is later, but it doesn't appear like you're showcasing it by having it at 9 a.m.
Yeah. I don't know. Like I think if he hadn't been still playing in the NIT, I think we could have gotten the usual last week. There's a lot going on. Like, there's football Thursday tomorrow, football press conference tomorrow. There's the spring game. It's like,
why not do Ross Hodge Friday at the Coliseum?
I was just gonna say you could wait until Friday, but then it's like, do you want to wait? I guess you've already waited a week. What's one more day? I guess. Right. But I don't know. Like, I don't know. I don't read too much into it. It is obvious, like, they could have had it in the call, right? Like, WVU has the resources. They could have done it. Like, if they wanted it open to the public, it would be. If they wanted it in the Coliseum, it would be. If they wanted it at 2 p.m, it would be. It's not. I'm not going to, before we hear from the man, I'm not going to sit here and say they're hiding him away or sequestering him from the public.
No. It's also going to. It's going to be the other end of this too. It's going to be streamed live, so they know that there are West Virginia fans all over the globe, and I hear from them a lot during the Rich Rod pressers during spring, where a lot of them, Cody, I'm sure you've heard this, they are mad that they are not streaming Rich Rod's pressers, and they are and I kind of like it, by the way, and I know why they're doing it. It's actually respect to us, people that are coming down there. They're making you absorb media coverage, which it should be the case in some respects. So, especially when there's been so much misreporting. But I know there are fans upset about that because they don't want to wait a couple hours for people to edit a video or upload a video or all that. And, during the season, I'm sure they're going to stream. So they're streaming this. You're getting this live. You don't need us for this. They're going to stream this. So they're not hiding. But I will say this too, Cody. As much as I do think it's weird and it does send a message that this is not the same hoopla or fanfare that even DeVries was, because he was so known as a national commodity from a tournament appearance, even though it's not like Rich Rod. I also think it's kind of a smart move in a way, because when you think about it, Cody, if you would do a Coliseum presser a lot of fans don't know who Ross Hodge is. He could be a great coach. I got to be fair to him. They don't know who he is. This isn't a homecoming of sorts like Rich Rod. This is not Darren DeVries, who you were getting a darling that the national media was talking about. You weren't getting an NBA prospect with him like there was hype for that.
Mm-hmm.
How many fans would go? And then
Yeah.
you're embarrassing him, and then you're making it look bad. I think Wren is not stupid. He knows this. I'm sure he's thinking this is a coach I believe is going to win, but this fan base does not know him, and they probably are not all excited about it. And he probably told Ross, you're going to have to sell these people, and I'm not going to put you in the Coliseum and have nobody sit there. And, if you lose in year one and you go 0-4 in the first handful of games, there will be a lot of activity on social media, a lot of negativity. Just don't log on. I'm sure Wren has privy to him on all of this situation.
Yeah.
He knows the fan base very well, despite only being there a few years. So I think this is better than doing a 2 p.m. You're following Rich Rod's presser. You're going 2 p.m. your afternoon showcase. Then nobody's in the Coliseum. Somebody, fumbles with their camera and takes a shot. There's nobody there. And then a rival fan throws it all over social media. And then you're getting embarrassed. I don't think Wren wants to go down that road. So, you know what this is comparable to? And this is, maybe people don't, and this will connect us to the beginning of the show. This will be how we'll end. And maybe people don't like this comparison. Cody, if you recall, this was before your time. This is exactly how they handled Neal Brown's presser. His intro presser was at the team room. There was not fanfare. There was just media people who were important with the program. Jersey was there, but it was not what they've been doing in recent years. And, take that for what it is. It's similar to how that was handled. There was more, at least positivity on that hire at the time, if you can believe it, than even now with Ross Hodge. But I think this is protecting him in a way. I think I would have preferred it for my schedule, but I don't know how they would have been able to sell to fans. People drove hours to do the Rich Rod one. DeVries was even packed because, again, he was known. There'd be nobody there. I mean, in the middle of the day, who's going? I mean, no one's taking off work for the Ross Hodge presser, and I'm sure Wren knows that. So you got to do one. This is probably more of an obligation. He might even rather not do it if he can get away with not doing it. So that'll be something to look forward to. We'll have coverage on that, and then everything else going on. Of course, a big week in a way, and then maybe a lull, even though recruiting will happen, but maybe a lull. I like to see some pictures of Wren Baker on vacation. I think he needs it. So
I'd like to see some pictures of me and you on vacation, Mike.
I'd like to see some pictures. Yes, I would like to go on vacation. I would like to. Yeah, yes. Unfortunately, in my personal life, I don't think it'll bring me to a vacation this summer. But I would like to go on a vacation, and I would like to go on a vacation in which nobody texts me and says, "Oh, here's this piece of news," or "Here's this person saying this." Or this person said this, and oh man, let's track this incredibly dramatic story that we're trying to spin into. I like to go on a vacation like that, but that's not what the case has been covering WVU the last several years. So maybe Father's Day will be easier for me this year as well, because the second shoe that dropped for Huggins was my first Father's Day. I received a picture with my daughter, received looking at my phone like, oh man, this has ruined the day for me. Quite a bit of more work to do. But yeah, I'd like everybody to go on vacation. Maybe we should all take a week off. Everyone just unplug. And then start again. Fans, media, everybody. That'll do it for this edition of Mountaineer Report. Find us everywhere you hear podcasts. Find us here on YouTube. Find our coverage, of course, at WV Sports Now.